Yeah, so let's start with the report on LGBT identification. That's called Born This Way. The statistic that I found most interesting was the following. A very liberal white female who supports the idea of shouting down a speaker to prevent them speaking has around a 7 in 10 chance of being LGBT, which is quite incredible. I was wondering, what do you think is the most stunning finding of your report?
Well, I guess the most stunning finding is that this tremendous surge in LGBT identification amongst young people is largely about identity and politics rather than about sexual behavior. So, in other words, it's not, in what you might say, it's not really a real thing, it's much more of an identification. So that's really it as far as the report. Now, there are also the second part of the report is also the connection between LGBT identification, being politically on the left, and also having poor mental health. Those three things are highly correlated in almost every data set. And I'm not convinced that the reason for that is experiences of discrimination leading someone to be both left wing and have poor mental health. I actually think there are other things going on which we've never really had a proper discussion of, which are more to do with anomie and the loss of boundaries, which feeds into both things.
Eric, do you think this has anything to do with so-called victimhood culture, whereby especially white males and white females, they're sort of low on the victimhood hierarchy, and so there's not much left to self-identify as other than maybe gay or disabled, and you're actually seeing disabilities and mental disabilities as the new pronouns in biographies sometimes. Do you think that's part of it? Is that just sort of an
Yeah,
after effect?
yeah. I think there's really two. I mean, I have the analysis of the ideology we're living under, which I call left modernism, which is a fusion of two ideas. One is this idea of being anti-traditional and breaking down boundaries, which is the sort of modernism part. And then allied to that is this sort of egalitarianism and oppressor oppressed analysis based on identity,
Right.
which is the left framework. And I think both are operating in this case. So we have, like, particularly amongst white university students at elite colleges, you can see that politics really correlates very strongly with LGBT identity. If you're very liberal, on a 7-point scale, you're much more likely to identify as LGBT. And for example, if you support shouting down speakers, if you are a very liberal woman, female student who supports shouting down speakers, you've got a 7 in 10 chance of identifying LGBT. So I do
Wow.
think that
That's
I mean, it's staggering, right? I mean, in certain circles, the political angle really counts. And I would say in more elite circles. But then you also have relatively less political groups, let's say African American females without degrees, who have a significant LGBT component. And here I think the modernist thing comes in more, this idea that you're more interesting, you're different, you're special. That's really, I think, what's driving it amongst amongst people without, let's say, who are not in the elite context. So I think that combination of the left and the modernism is really what's behind this.
Yeah, just really anecdotally, quickly, I've taught both at like elite universities and open enrollment public universities. So to take two extremes, the University of Pennsylvania and University of Arizona. And first of all, it's really clear at, say, Arizona, you just don't see very much LGBT activism. You don't see any protests, really, a lot of parties. But when I've asked sort of confidentially among Penn students that I've encountered, what's going on with this LGBT stuff and all the trans issues, people, as you know, on campuses make claims, outrageous claims, like trans people are being murdered in the
Right.
streets and these guys. And I just sort of, yeah, what's going on here? Sincerely, what do you guys think? And I get both kinds of answers. So I have heard that, well, it's just a kind of rebellion. It's just a way of breaking norms, which makes sense. It's like punk was in the 80s.
Right,
And
right.
then there's some of the conformity stuff too, right? So women who want to conform to this new code, so to speak. So
Yeah, I mean, you can see which subcategories have the most growth. So female bisexual is the biggest growth category.
yeah,
Um, so it's in that bisexual category, and what if you really look at the numbers, what it is people who have kind of intermittent incidental thoughts, which probably has always existed, identifying themselves as bisexual. I mean, that's the lion's share of what's going on. Whereas if you actually compare with, in the general social survey, we've got the question about previous sexual partners, what sex were they, and you can see very clearly that if you take, let's say, female bisexuals today versus 2008, in 2008, you would have had very few female bisexuals who would have had nothing but male partners over the last 5 years. And now that's about 6 in 10. So there's been this huge rise in people with, women with conventional sexual behavior calling themselves bisexual. Yep. So we have to ask ourselves why that identification has really, really exploded. And I think it's really for those reasons you identify and that I identify. It's a combination of the cachet of being different, the kind of more modernist thing. It's like a punk, a goth thing, or on the other hand, this political statement.